and then you can start.
Okay, so we're going to give it just another minute or so before we get started. People are still entering. We're going to give it another minute or so. People are still entering. We'd like to capture everybody, so just be patient. We'll be starting in just a moment. I think we're about ready, Natasha. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to ACEC's New York Winter Forum. I'm Diana Kaufman of CNS Companies, and together with Kathy Metcalf of CPL, I co-chair the HR committee. We're really excited about today's presentation, a new approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It's offered as a joint session, as you know, across all the ACEC tracks. We hope you'll find some good takeaway today, and we think that this will be some really thought-provoking conversation, so we're glad to have you with us here. Before we get started, we have just a few reminders. First of all, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring questions there and attending to them throughout the presentation as well as at the end. If you are seeking SHRM or HRCI credit, it will be posted at the very end of the presentation on a slide, so please watch for that. Today's presentation will be available on the members-only session of the ACEC New York website and will also be recorded, and a presentation will be emailed to all attendees following today's conference. And with that, we'd like to thank TriNet for sponsoring the session, and I turn it over to Paul Hermes, who can tell us a bit more about TriNet.
Thank you, Diane. Again, my name is Paul Hermes. I'm with TriNet. TriNet is an official sponsor and the official HR partner of ACEC New York, to which we are a single source HR solution that automates and streamlines the entire HR function of an engineering and architectural firm. Aside from everything from an HR perspective that we provide our clients, we also provide our small business clients with superior medical benefits at below market rates, delivered in a very cost-efficient manner. With that said, I'd like to introduce the chair of ACEC New York, Mr. Ray Dadazio. Ray, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. The topic of diversity and inclusion is certainly not new. And at my firm, Thornton Tomasetti, we've been consciously trying to move the proverbial needle since I joined the firm. In fact, we have a saying, inclusion and diversity leads to innovation in design. And as engineers, we've even tried to write it down as a formula, I plus D squared. I know that it's not mathematically correct, but it's our belief that inclusion and diversity leads to exponential growth in innovative design. And since our big goal at TT is to be the global driver of change and innovation in our industry, how can we not embrace inclusion and diversity? We were going along happily, and then we all witnessed the murder of George Floyd. And that changed everything. That tragic event was a catalyst. I would say the catalyst for listening, for reflection, for conversation, and a resolve to change and be better. These conversations were profoundly impactful to me personally and to our staff, and at least within our firm, they are continuing and will continue. There are some simple but important words written by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel that crystallized all of this for me. And those words are, few are guilty, but all are responsible. We must accept our responsibility. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker and moderator for this session, Dr. Jarek Conrad. Dr. Conrad leads the Human Insights and Human Capital Management Evangelism Group at UKG where he works to help organizations put their people first. Immediately prior to joining UKG, he led the Conrad Consulting Group, where he served as an executive coach, keynote speaker, management consultant. He has held human resource leadership roles in private, public, and nonprofit sectors, and he has also been a research collaborator with the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Conrad has been very generous and has offered to speak today free of charge. And to show our appreciation, we ask that you consider making a donation to the Alzheimer's Association in memory of his mother, Rita Conrad. So, after this session, go to the Alzheimer's Association's website. That's www.alz.org. On the top right, click on Donate. On the next page, there's a checkbox to make a gift to honor the memory of someone. Please enter the name Rita Conrad, and you can also donate by mail or phone. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jarek Conrad. Dr. Conrad, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Raymond. Can you see my presentation and hear me okay? Perfect. Well, thank you again for that kind introduction. Indeed, it's been a challenging time, to say the least. There's been a lot going on, and obviously we're dealing with the challenges, still dealing with the challenges associated with the pandemic, and then to have the George Floyd incident happen in the middle of all of that, it really did spark a level of discussion that was very much needed. So that's the one positive in all of this, is that we're having a conversation. So it's interesting when I'm talking to engineers. It's one of my favorite groups to talk to, because I was an aspiring engineer. I spent 3 years. I got out of engineering at the last minute. They let me get out at the University of Illinois. I spent 4 summers working at McDonnell Douglas in various capacities. So you'll notice, as I talk about an issue like diversity, equity, and inclusion, you'll notice that I use formulas and charts and models to try to understand it. And in many ways, I think I still have that that problem-solving mentality. And engineers, offer great promise as it relates to this, because I think too much of the discussion has been, only focused on the social sciences, and, have this reputation for being touchy-feely, let's hold hands and kumbaya. And I think we need to bring more of the analytical problem-solving approach to understanding this challenge, just like we would with any challenge we're dealing with in business. So I think engineers are uniquely qualified to understand this stuff. So I mentioned that we have a lot going on, both in the United States and across the globe, not only with the pandemic and the protests, but natural disasters. I mean, I'm here in California. We've had all these fires in Florida. They've had the most active hurricane season on record. We have just overall political unrest. People are going through a lot right now. And some people are stepping back to really start to ask broader questions about, what does all this mean? Who are we, and what is our responsibility to each other? So I want to start by just kind of laying out, you hear these terms, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, kind of laying out how I'm thinking about this for the purposes of our discussion today. Diversity is just having the right people in the room, or a right mix of people in the room. Are we seeing people from different backgrounds, right? Is it present? Equity is, are people being treated the same, right? Do they have equal opportunity? Inclusion is, to what degree or is their voice being heard? And belonging is a little bit deeper. You've really, over the last 3 to 5 years, that term belonging has started to come up more in the discussions, because it's a deeper level of, you can do all the right things on paper, but do I feel like this is the place for me? Do I feel like I can be my authentic self here? One of the things I like to do when I'm having these discussions is to just immediately take off the table that we're blaming any one group or isolating any one group. This is not an assault on anybody. Not white people if we're talking about race, not males if we're talking about gender, not straight people if we're talking about issues of sexual orientation. And so that's not the issue. The issue is when these characteristics lead to viewpoints that negatively affect other people, that traumatize other people, that isolate, marginalize other people. And so, I could be speaking, which I have, I could be speaking to a group of all white males and still be talking about diversity because there's diversity within that group. Just like an engineer in some ways might be different from an HR person, that's an aspect of diversity. So I want us to think really broadly. And my hope is that we're drawing people into the conversation and not pushing people away. So, I mentioned all these things are going on. And I think we're at a unique point right now in human evolution that we're reaching this crossroads. We have this incredible technology that we can. I mean, my house is smart now. I can say the word and lights go on, lights go off. Things happen. At the same time, we are dealing with instincts that we have had since the beginning, of early humans, and these instincts are not necessarily well suited for modern society. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're really at this crossroads and trying to understand who we are, how we are, and why we are. And it all goes back to the basics, right? We are designed for survival. We have, our brains are wired to keep us safe. So there are certain attributes that we have that were very necessary for us back on the African savannah when it's us and the Neanderthals. We're trying to fight for survival of the species. There are certain attributes that were necessary for that kind of context that we still have, that we've carried over. And, we don't have saber-toothed lions chasing us or something like that, saber-toothed tigers. We don't have, but we still have, in many ways, these default mechanisms to keep us safe. And so oftentimes when these systems get out of whack, we can have our fear mechanism is in hyperdrive. And it leads to things like hate, for instance, which has been on the rise. I know this organization is celebrating 100 years of existence. And, when you think about where we were 100 years ago and where we are now, undoubtedly there's been, tremendous progress. But we seem to keep falling back into some of our old ways. And I know some of the things that we've seen on display in public in the past year really harkens back to the civil rights era, with times where, before I was born, where I just didn't think we would necessarily be seeing this stuff again. So it's important. So again, I talked about the fact that we are pre-wired for some of this. And so let's talk about a little bit of this. Now, in some ways, the reason that we're okay with violence is because we get high on it a little bit. So engaging in violent behavior releases a certain amount of dopamine in our brains. And, dopamine is like a drug, it makes us feel good. Why would that be? Well, again, if you think back to the early days of human beings, sometimes hand-to-hand combat was necessary, or sometimes, fighting with an animal, just, these skills, was necessary. So if human beings didn't have a mechanism to make us want to engage in that behavior, we probably wouldn't be here today. So we needed the ability to fight. But again, in modern society, that obviously complicates things. It causes a lot of issues. Tribalism. Tribalism is another case. So We were designed to be tribal. Again, if that tiger is chasing you, you are more likely to be safe if you go with the pack than you are if you went it alone. You go down that path alone, it's easier to isolate you and come and get you, right? So tribalism is something that we're born with. It's been necessary for our survival. We have carried that instinct over. We know as early as 9 months old, children can start to understand differences in racial groups. In the same group, they can understand more specific features of face because that's where I see my safety. And so we're wired for some of this stuff. And again, my purpose in talking about this is, if we can understand the neuroscience associated with this, then some of this behavior can be predicted. And if we can predict it, we can get in front of it. We can potentially control it. So this all starts really early. And we can see it on the school ground with toddlers. We can see behaviors. What do they play with? What dolls do they pick up? Who do they engage with? So when people say, well, children, they don't see race. That's not true. Everything about science tells us that they do see it, but they don't have the baggage associated with it yet. That's the part that's taught. That's the part that they're either directly taught or indirectly taught as it relates to society. So, but they see these differences. Everything we know about science suggests that. And the reality is, if they don't experience something to overcome the default mechanism to be tribal, if they don't have broad experiences with people who look different than them, that they can connect with, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to try to overcome that default wiring. So this becomes particularly problematic when you have a society, when you have some groups that are dominant and non-dominant, right? So dominant just in terms of numbers, you got 80%, 70% of this group and 20 or 30% of this group. The reality is the dominant group oftentimes gets to set the rules, right? And that becomes the quote unquote standard. So it's interesting how this works out. Now, I want you to think about this. So even if you don't have any ill will or negativity in your heart as it relates to other groups, and you're in a dominant group, it's really easy to fall into thinking that my group is the standard. My group is normal. My group is regular. The challenge with that is that consciously or subconsciously, these other groups become substandard, becomes abnormal. You see what I mean? So it's a challenge when you're thinking about it. When you step back and think about it, it's a challenge when you have large, groups that fit certain demographic characteristics that are in this dominant population. So, I was presenting to a school, a private school, one day down in Florida, and we were talking about the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the teachers said, "Look," this teacher was white. She said, "Look, my daughter brought her friend home from school. She was black, she's a black girl, and she was with us all day and had dinner with us, and she was just like a normal person. So, like, why wouldn't she be like a normal person, right? So in her mind, she had this, us and them, normal, and something else, and she didn't even realize she was operating like that. So when you have these kinds of mechanisms at play, let's talk about how some of the disparities that have occurred end up being built in and perpetuated. So I try to stay away from terms like privilege. When we're talking about issues like diversity, one of the terms that come up is white privilege. And I really try to stay away from that term because it triggers some emotions in people. And, look, if I were born poor and white and I know I had to work really hard and I was the only one in my family to graduate and all that, I probably wouldn't understand that term either, right? It might shut me down. So I try to describe these phenomena without trying to use these loaded terms. So real quickly, when you think about this system, These are people who normally folks think of as privileged, right? I'm already wealthy. I'm born wealthy. I'm in the overrepresented group. So in many ways, the rules were designed, by people like me. So certainly they're going to be designed to benefit people like me. And in many ways, the system is just a gift that keeps on giving, right? I have resources, I can invest, et cetera. Not suggesting that you're not working hard. You might be wealthy and be a really hard worker. I'm not suggesting that that's not the case. I'm saying regardless of your work ethic, it's nice to be born into a situation with some resources. So here's the group that this whole idea of merit really resonates with. If I'm middle class or poor, even if I'm in the overrepresented group, I got to compete, right? The system is not giving me anything, right? I got to compete with folks. The reality is the system is not giving you anything, but the system is not disadvantaging you. And that's where this whole notion of privilege kind of gets, involved in the discussion. So it just depends on how you look at it. Is it an advantage not to be disadvantaged? Most people will say, well, yeah, I'd rather not be disadvantaged. So when you're wealthy or middle class, but you're in an underrepresented group, in many ways, the system is still designed to to disadvantage you. Your people are wary of you. When regardless of being Dr. Conrad and master's degrees from Ivy League schools and all that doesn't necessarily matter. When I put on some gym clothes and I go get in my car and drive to the gym, if I encounter somebody who has certain ideas and stereotypes and fears and, generalizations about Black people, they're going to apply that to me. They have no idea what my education is. They have no idea what my income level is. And so it doesn't matter in some cases because people make decisions based on what they see. And when you're poor and you're in an underrepresented group, it's really tough because not only is the system disadvantaging you, but people blame you for the system. These other folks say, look, I would have more if it wasn't for having to take care of you, right? The system is hostile toward you. And I'll tell you, growing up in the projects in East St. Louis, Illinois, I felt that as a young person, even though we know most poor people work. For instance, the vast majority of people who are on welfare actually work. We have these stereotypes about who these people are and what they do. So rather than talking about, terms like white privilege, I try to design, some kind of model. Again, it's that engineering background. I need some kind of structure to help me understand the behavior that I'm seeing. So are we ready for a change? Well, I don't know. It's a challenge because we can't agree on how we got to where we are in the first place. So if you ask people across these groups, when we see these disparities, these ongoing disparities between certain groups, are those disparities a result of society's inequity, or are those disparities a result of a lack of individual effort? And so I'll just let you take a moment here and look at the slide. We see we have some deep divides. Now, I'm not making a political statement. This is research that has gathered, perspectives. And my only point here is that, as long as we are so far apart in understanding the root cause or the root causes of these situations, it's going to be difficult for us to design some kind of intervention to overcome these challenges. So as a society, we're going to have to figure this out. So you get all those demographic categories. And then, of course, from a racial standpoint, if we're talking about discrimination, if you're in an underrepresented group, you feel like it's out there. If you're in an overrepresented group, you more likely don't feel like that's happening. So this is interesting. I do a lot of work with emotional intelligence, and I try to understand what triggers people's emotions, like why do they believe what they believe, and how is that emotionally rewarding for them. So let's talk about success. I know in this organization you have a lot of successful people. So how can one achieve success? Well, you can work harder than everybody else, be more talented than everybody else, be more intelligent. You can exploit everybody else. People don't like to talk about that one, but there are many, many cases of people who I was already born with a bunch of resources. I use those resources to dominate other people. Or you could be luckier than everybody else. So if we had time, I would have done a poll to see what you all think. Which one of these do you think best predicts somebody's chance of success here in America? And we like to believe that it's just about hard work and talent. But the reality is, all the data suggests that the number one predictor is the family that you're born into, right? It's what's called the birth lottery, or the lottery of birth. The family that you're born into is remarkably predictive of where you might end up. Your zip code in America, you can tell people your education level, your race, your poverty status, all kinds of stuff. So we got to understand why these systems are at place. So why does this myth of meritocracy? Now, again, I'm not suggesting that hard work is not important, that intellect doesn't matter, that talent doesn't matter. All those things matter. But you might have all those things and be born in a terrible situation and just you can't make it. You might have few of those things and born in a terrific situation and you make it. The challenge that we're having right now is this battle between belief and knowledge, and belief is much stronger than knowledge in many ways because of the emotion that's associated with it. Here's a really important point that I hope that all of us can keep in mind. We are mere data points in the grand scheme of things. I hate to reduce us to data points, but we're mere data points in the grand scheme of things when you look at the course of human existence. When you're trying to chart something on a math equation and you got all these data points that kind of cluster in here, and then you have 2 or 3 that are just off the screen way over here, you really focus on the ones that are in the cluster because that's going to inform you about what's going on in that particular equation. In real life, we don't do that with people, though. We grab those outliers and we talk about those outliers and we hold up those outliers because, again, those outliers grab our emotion. But we know better. We understand that if we really want to understand the human condition, we got to focus on what's happening to these clusters, to the broadest number of people, because that's going to inform us more of what the details are. So I mentioned that we're at this crossroads. We've been existing in a situation where we have a handful of people who've been very successful and a growing population of people who are struggling, and then these people in the middle that are just trying to survive, trying to keep from falling to the bottom. The system is constantly engaged in this push-pull, pulling us toward change, trying to hold us back to hold on to the status quo. So how do we break this cycle? I mean, we really got to step back and think about, again, what is our responsibility to each other? What's our responsibility to the planet? These broader questions are really, really important. And I'm proposing that we are going to have to put vulnerable people at the center, including underrepresented folks that have been left out, that have been, kind of engineered out of the process. Without doing this, we are a threat to just no guarantee that human beings are going to survive. And at this pace, it makes it tough to believe that we will. So I'm suggesting, why wait thousands of years for, human evolution to happen? If we're so wise, why don't we decide that we're going to make this shift to put more compassion at the center of what we do? Because the what's in it for me is, again, this is unsustainable that you have these growing numbers of vulnerable people. At some point, it puts us all at risk. So it's interesting. I showed you that list of hate groups, and part of this is driven by propaganda. Part of this is driven by propaganda, and obviously social media makes it easy for people to find what they want to find and connect with people who believe what they believe or what they want to believe. And so it's fascinating how conspiracy theories and all of that can flourish. Now, for me, I think that we got to think about what makes us tick. And you hear a lot of people using this term common sense. Well, if there are more jobs out there than there are people who can fill them. Now, this was pre-pandemic. So obviously, if you don't have a job, that must mean you're lazy. We know it's deeper than that. And so as you go and you start asking, peeling back the onion and start asking more and more questions, you realize a level of complexity. And so it's not what you think might be common sense, may not be so obvious, right? Then there's this whole host of logic traps that people fall in, that we're not able to apply our critical thinking. And the reality is even smart people fall into these traps because, the brain, you got this cognitive component of the brain, and then you got this emotional component of the brain, the affective component of the brain. And oftentimes because of our wiring, emotions kick in and things like fight or flight kind of disable us from getting to those cognitive skills that we might even possess. If we can't get past that emotional barrier, we're very vulnerable to falling into some of these traps like confirmation bias. The reality is people don't really see what's in front of them. They see what they expect to see. They see what they need to see. They see what they want to see. And we have proof. If you go to, my wife is an attorney, and we know that the most unreliable form of testimony is eyewitness testimony because they see what they want to see. So I'm suggesting that we need to all be thinking in our organizations about emotional intelligence. How are emotions affecting how I perceive information, how I perceive situations, and how I react to those situations? It's a critical set of skills. I thought I would mention this. We talk about the fact that if we just sit back, this thing is going to change, right? Things happen over time. And the reality is, yes, Gen Zers and millennials are more likely to be understanding and appreciative and desiring to have more diverse environments, and they think it's good for society. But when I look at this, I like the trend, but the reality is that means 38% don't believe it's good for society. It means we still have some work to do. So we have to understand that doing nothing is actually doing something. And so you have people who are they're anti-equity, like I don't believe that people should be treated equally. Then you got people who are passive. I'm not necessarily marching in the streets, but I don't really believe that everybody stacks up. I don't believe that all people are created equal. Then you have people who are pro-equity, but they're passive about it. They weren't in the streets with George Floyd, or they're not writing things, or they're not saying things to their friends and family who hold some of these antiquated beliefs. So the reality is here, you just can't, looking the other way perpetuates the status quo. So it's actually contributing to the challenge. So unless we're active in some way, I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to be marching in the street holding signs. I'm saying if we haven't found a lane that fits us and are active in some way in leveling the playing field, we are, we can't say that we're part of the solution. I'm going to start to wind down here, but I do want to talk about if you're an employer, number one, when you see these things happening in society, don't explain it away. At some point, we got to realize that what we're seeing, these patterns that we see, means something. That data is relevant. And there is such a thing as systemic racism, for instance, systemic sexism. I mean, there is such a thing as those. We got to educate ourselves about that. And again, share that knowledge with the people around us. And we got to be able to say something when we see it. It's important that we talk to our kids about this. Otherwise, we have to rely on information that they're piecing together from other sources. If you feel like you want to get more engaged, maybe you want to give to a cause or, support women and minority-owned businesses. But most of all, I think you got to find your own path, find what your lane is, and dive into that. Now, if you are a leader, you got to make sure it's really important that you set the right tone for your organization. And it starts by doing no further harm, either directly or indirectly. Be really attuned to what's going on around you. So listen, not only with your ears, but with your eyes. If you don't expand your network, if your network is just made of people who look like you or think like you or believe what you do, even if you're a kind person, a nice person, a well-meaning person, you are leaving yourself very vulnerable to those default mechanisms in the brain that cause us to stereotype and generalize, etc. So it's important to engage in these experiences, and that's how you rewire the brain. The other thing is take an active stand. I mean, if you're a leader, you have some influence, you can actively mentor someone, or when you're in a room, who's representing the underrepresented folks? You know, do you have people in your organization that you can vouch for, that you can sponsor either within your organization or, you know, outside of your organization? It's going to be really critically important for leaders to become very active and set the appropriate tone. So I think that's about my 30 minutes, and I couldn't see if any questions came in. So let me stop sharing my screen here and see, did we have any quick questions that came in? I don't see anything. So I think we are okay. If you do have questions, remember, submit your questions. We're going to shift to the second part of the program here. We are going to be joined by a wonderful panel, so you don't have to be staring at my face for much longer. Let me go ahead and introduce the panelists. First, we have Alexandra Gore. Alexandra is the Deputy Manager of the New York City Traffic Engineering and ITS Department, and she's a lead transportation engineer. Hello, Alexandra. Next, we have Tom Mitchell. Tom is the past president and CEO and currently a senior consultant to Bergman Architects, Engineers, and Planners. How you doing, Tom?
Yeah, good morning.
All right. Next, we have Ricardo Carlos Perez. Ricardo is the Director of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement at Stantec Consulting Services. Hey, Ricardo. All right, next we have Cletus O. Izinwa. Cletus is the Chief Executive Officer at Lu Engineers. Hey, Cletus. Oh, yeah, I got your name right. I've been practicing that, man, hoping to get it right.
Absolutely.
All right. Next, we have Adanma C. Akugiyaza.
Right.
Is that right? She's the Chief Financial Officer at Larson Design Group. And so welcome to all of our panelists. It's kind of unfair for them because I know this is the first time they've really had a chance to see and hear my presentation. So I can imagine they have a million things that they might want to react to. But I have a few questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists, and they'll jump in if they have some additional comments. So first of all, let's start with Alexandra.
Sure.
Yes. Oh, can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Alexandra. We try to have a really diverse panel here, and you may be the youngest person that we have on our panel. And so not to ask you to speak for all young people who are professional engineers, but give me your perspective on this. I mentioned on the slide that we see the trend line changing a little bit, but I'm not quite 100% happy with those numbers. Tell me from your perspective, do you see these challenges going away? Do you see a really big difference between how you and your circle deal with these issues versus when you think about other groups in the workplace?
I absolutely do think that there is a difference, but it's really not so black and white. Yes, the younger generations have the reputation of taking diversity, equity, and inclusion to a deeper level in the workplace than ever before. And I do think that as younger professionals, we should voice what we expect from our industry and our employers. I've seen seasoned managers say, oh, I have a white engineer, I have a black engineer, I have a female, and I have a male. Great, we're diverse. But then they still expect everyone to think and act just like them.
Mm.
And that really misses the point. We're more than just what we might look like in a picture. There needs to be an appreciation and a focus on our diversity of experiences and thoughts and ideas that each of us bring to the table. So I think that but that's not enough though. It really needs to be both top down as well as bottom up. So I just explained from the bottom up, encourage the emerging leaders to voice what they want and what they need in an industry. But the truth is we can't just wait for the older generation to retire, nor do I want to, because there are a lot of really great people in the more seasoned generations that I enjoy working with and I want them to stay. The industry culture wouldn't change overnight anyway with a few, retirements. By the way, nor are all millennials or Gen Zers born with an appreciation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that everyone needs to be educated on these topics, no matter where they're from, but everyone needs to be educated now.
Yeah, you made some great points. And, one that sticks out with me is the fact that it's not just about checking a box like, oh, I got one.
Sure. We're so much more than the boxes we check.
It's much deeper than that. We have to be having conversations when in our screening processes. We have to be having conversations to find out what people's experiences are like and not want to make them fit into a certain predefined box when they get there, or else you're just missing out on the whole benefit of diversity. Now,
absolutely.
Let's switch. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Let's switch. You mentioned the term seasoned, so we're going to be kind to Tom. Tom is our most seasoned presenter here on the panel. So, Tom, from that perspective, look, you've been engaged in this for a long time. I mean, not just working, but specifically, engaged in these discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging. So, give us a perspective of where you think we are now compared to when you first got started in this work.
Sure. Well, contrasting it to where we got started, and you can use the word old, seasoned. But, I graduated from high school in 1969, upstate New York, Corning, New York. We had two high schools, and they were both about the same demographics. My graduating class, 360 students. I think there were 3 African Americans. I don't think there was a Hispanic student. Went to Clarkson University, and I think while I was there, we had 2,500 students, most in engineering curricula. 25 women, as I recall. I don't think there was an African American. There were many international students. I had a roommate that was from Uganda, but I don't, again, believe there was an African American. I don't remember Hispanics. Graduated in 1973, joined a firm, Stone & Webster, which at the time was a top 10 international architect, engineering, construction firm. I remember they told us that they hired 100 engineers that year from across the country. Again, I don't remember a woman. I don't remember an African American. There were a handful of international students. I think there was Hispanic. And so, it was a white, male-dominated field, of course. You fast forward that to today, and, I was looking at some recent data from the American Council of Engineering Educators, and I think most recent data they had, engineering graduates were 65% white. Of that, 20% female. African American was only 4%. And I look at our firm, past firm, Bergman. I think we've done very well in the area of African Americans and women. Approaching those numbers, 20%, 5% African American. But it's still a white dominated firm. And when I look at my career, the most successful, I think, in terms of performance was mid-career, where I was part of 2 groups that were heavily, 30 to 60% people of color. on the engineering team. And why it was number one, we were away from the core established firm on a project assignment that had us remote. We had people that thought in the metric system, thought in another language. So English was a second language or a third or fourth. They didn't know the company standards, so they threw out solutions that people back in Boston would say, you can't do that. That's not the way we do it. And they perform really well. So I became a believer, in a diverse workforce for the same reasons Alexandra brought up, the fact that they weren't in a box per se in terms of what was expected of them, at least personally.
Right.
So that's my background.
Right. So you've had some really interesting experiences, and we'll come back to you because I want to talk a little bit more about. A lot of people say this is important, but I know you've walked the talk. So we'll get a chance to talk about that in a little bit. But thank you so much. So certainly lots of change, but when you look at those statistics, we're still not representative of the population. So some work to do. Ricardo, Tom mentioned, some experiences and having more international perspective and another element of diversity. I know a lot of your background has been international. Your life story has been international, right? You grew up in Mexico, you moved to Canada, now you live here in the United States. You focus in your work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe talk a little bit from a broader perspective, from a global perspective. I know we tend to get U.S. centric when we talk about this issue. Tell us a little bit more broadly what's going on as it relates to this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. And before I jump into it, just a couple of things. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear Tom. I hope the audience did, because it sounds like he was sharing pretty insightful words there based on your reaction. I couldn't hear him, so you and the team know. And second, I am very pleased.
We won't tell you what he said about you. Then we'll keep.
Yeah, I know. Please don't, because then, Tom. So you can just go right ahead and but I think I can hear the rest of the panel. And thank you again for having me. Congrats to ACEC for its 100-year anniversary. What a milestone. So it's really an honor to be part of the panel here with Alexandra, Adama, Cletus, and Tom and yourself, Jarek. And I also want to give a shout out to my colleagues, hopefully are in the audience, and everybody who made time to really join in this important discussion. I got to tell you, Jarek, that I did take a lot of notes from your presentation. So there is a lot there that you cover, and hopefully we can get to some of that during the course of the panel. Going back to your question in terms of the different dynamics that I see from my perspective playing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging globally. There are definitely some differences that I see. There are also some similarities. So let me start off with the differences, and I like to use the iceberg analogy. Like there's certain things that are easy to see, and the vast majority is under that waterline. And by the way, that reference, that analogy is pretty. There is a cultural component of it, right? This analogy very widely used in North America. I also have heard about the hippo analogy, which I also like quite a bit. You only see kind of the eyes of the hippo, and then the vast majority is under the waterline. So even the way we talk about, right, has really connotations into how we see and perceive culture. So the difference that I have seen related to these topics are the terminology, right? There is different terminology that we use in different countries. Do you say Black? Do you say African American? Do you say African Canadian? Right? Is it Indigenous or Aboriginal? Is it Latinx or Hispanic? Right? So and each of those terms have a meaning. I do believe that, especially in this space, words matter. So I always encourage people to really reflect on that, right? But there are definitely some major differences in that regard. The other aspect is in terms of the legislation, right? What are the protected grounds? Why do we have the legislation to begin with? What is the impact? What is the responsibility? And one of my colleagues recently told me that legislation is important because that is how we drive also accountability, right? That really resonated with me. In terms of the under the waterline, if I go back to my iceberg analogy, there's a ton down there in terms of the history, right? Like, what is the history of racism in the United States versus the history of racism in Canada, as an example? I've lived in Mexico as well, right? And conversation there goes not much about race, but also and other aspects such as gender and social class, and it is really about understanding what is the history in terms of the groups that have been historically, but also contemporarily discriminated against. So that is another big component, and the cultural values and beliefs around that. So that is the connection to the systems that you were talking about earlier that I really, really enjoy. So I have seen those differences quite a bit. There are also some similarities, and the similarities, in my opinion, is really the impact, right? So it doesn't matter how you talk about it. It doesn't matter how the terminology that you use. It doesn't matter the different cultural components and the narrative in each of the country. The impacts are typically very similar, right? So, and that is the impacts of exclusion, right? That is the impacts of a toxic workplace, right? Of division, of misunderstanding, that does have a real impact on people saying, you know what, this is not a place for me, and they leave and take all of their talent and their experience with them, and that obviously hurts the business if we're talking about it from a business perspective. So those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ricardo. You made so many great points. One of the things that just struck me as you talked about, look, this impact is the same. So for me, it gets to this whole notion of shared humanity, and how do we? I think for a lot of people, that's what struck them when they watched this whole George Floyd incident. It's like, how can somebody do a human being like that? And regardless of your background or the country that you were in, or whatever your walk of life was, you identify with that human being. So thank you so much for.
And just briefly on that, yes, I mean, that was just horrific, I think, for all of us to witness. And I don't want to also, forget the other tragedies, right? Like Breonna Taylor and so many others that really happened so close to one another. And I did have many conversations with colleagues around the world, in Australia, in Peru, in the UK, who were calling and say, what's going on, and what can we do? What can I do from where I am right now? So I think that was another element that's as tragic as it was. It really brought that really call to action, as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, and that connection to our common humanity. That this cannot really happen. We just need to do better, and we all have to take responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing that. As we're thinking about doing better, some of the things, there have been legislation, there have been, policies that we've adopted to try to level the playing field. Some of them have been controversial. It depends on, where you sit. Cletus, I want to ask you this. There are conflicting opinions about programs that say, hey, we need to set aside, percentage of this opportunity for women, minority-owned businesses. Tell me about, how you feel about these programs. How successful do you think, it's been? And, is there any other approaches that you might suggest?
First, let me clarify the term set aside. A lot of people tend to understand it to include each and every measure geared towards fulfilling goals of minority and women participation. Set-asides in a classic sense are whole projects that are put out for competition and procurement only by specified groups or firms. And in that sense, set-asides are vital and necessary for targeted businesses, not only to get a foot in the door, but to obtain relevant experience to help them grow and become competitive in their fields. Yes, set-asides have the distinct advantage of providing wholesome experience on the entire project, and not just in bits and pieces of a project. Mm-hmm. Other methods of delivery teaming to satisfy to fulfill goals. Those that are not set aside are crucial in their own right. However, teaming up in a prime sub arrangement have their limitation. They may be financially rewarding and be a good way to fulfill participation goals, but they do not necessarily provide DMWBs with holistic experience to help them grow. And that leads to these firms specializing in areas like surveying, environmental impact statements, cultural studies, cultural resources, and fields that are easily that the primes can easily break out and give to firms. So they end up specializing in that. However, set-asides have a tendency to give experience on holistic experience on the entire project. Many years ago, as a partner in a starting firm, I was working on requesting, making every effort to request to be included in all different aspects of a project, public informational meetings and all that. And a client was telling me, Cletus, look, you don't have contractual relationship with the client, so we could not possibly involve you guys in so and so. Well, with set-asides, that excuse is out the window because DMWBs are involved in every aspect of the project, from contract negotiation all the way to final plans. And with all this said, set-aside, the term set-aside is frowned upon in our industry. It's a dirty word in our industry, unfortunately, and that should not be. People tend to look at set-asides as those projects as zero sum, whereby every project that is dedicated is something taken away from somebody else's plate. That is a misconception. It would take a long time, but I can go through ways of making that term and that process better so that people understand it as not zero sum, but something crucial for the industry. And as such, many state agencies come up with nice programs that I should say. I remember New York State DOT had one consultant-based preservation program years back, and that was a beautiful, very successful program where they put projects $1 million to $5 million construction value, and small DMWB and small size firms, qualified firms, go after it, compete for it, and it was a good way to get whole experience, and it helped the firms that were successful in it.
Yeah.
So, on the success of how successful have they been? Set-asides have been very successful. I know the firms that grew that participate in federal projects that do set-asides grow more rapidly than ones that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that success is evident in what's happening today with SDVOBs, service disabled veteran-owned businesses that do a lot of set-asides. And the federal level, they're growing very rapidly.
But Cletus, you've again, all of y'all are making these points. We could sit down and have, a whole hour discussion about all these. I think the points that what jumps out to me is you're talking about, long term. You're talking about not just getting a piece of a project. So my business is okay. I can make a little bit of revenue, et cetera. You're talking about enabling me long term to grow so that I can do bigger and bigger projects with these programs. What always, I try to simplify everything that I can, when I'm trying to understand these thorny issues. And the reality is we would need these kind of programs if the system didn't shut us out. So when people say, well, look, businesses will do that. Well, no, businesses have proven that they wouldn't do the right thing that, necessitated these programs having to be created. So the reality is these programs wouldn't exist if people weren't systematically being shut out. It seems like a very quote unquote common sense thing, but I don't think people step back and think about why were these programs created in the first place. So I appreciate your feedback, on that. Adama, we've talked a little bit about these global issues. Now you have a unique perspective. I know you and Cletus as well. You're from Nigeria, and it's interesting when people come from the continent of Africa and they come to the United States and having to deal with these terms, African American and all that, and in many ways, you are truly an African American, right? Talk a little bit about that experience, as it relates to, other Black people in the United States, or just your experiences, coming from somewhere else, and now having to confront some of the challenges associated with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in the United States.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I thank all the panelists. I'm really learning a lot, and I have a couple good number of notes here based on the conversation so far. So great session. I do indeed take my experience and perspective as unique because I essentially came as an international student to the U.S. I was 16 years old at the time. So that was my, first time outside of my parents' home and my bedroom and that I grew up in. And it struck me that D and I, is diversity, inclusion, and now we have, belonging and et cetera, that it was even a topic sort of on the table for discussion and great debate. And the way I dialed into it is by sort of comparing some of the inequities that I saw growing up. We talked about tribalism earlier. And because, a country like Nigeria has many, many tribes, I want to say over in the hundreds. So there is some sort of tribalism that exists akin to the caste system you would see in perhaps some other continents. In that environment, it's sort of known and expected. And, there's in some cases a quota system for who gets leadership at what times and that sort of thing. So it's pretty blatant. And then with coming to the U.S. and seeing that there were, at the time, the diversity discussion was just being birthed, I think, in earnest. And seeing that there are these discussions about an issue, but the big difference is it wasn't widely acknowledged. Whereas, where I grew up, it's known that, these tribes may not like each other and that sort of thing. And, we rally around and get through it. But it's the non-acknowledgement or the refusal to acknowledge on a wide scale that really struck me. And the fact that certain groups of people argue with the fact that the system in some cases does not, and that system word, I use it sort of loosely, does not provide as many opportunities for certain groups of people. The research does show that, and I like what Alexandra talked about, the diversity of thought, right? The diversity is not a box to be checked off. It's something with tangible fruit, again, that yields tangible fruit, as the research shows. So in trying to piece it all together, I think one of the biggest issues I've seen, and my one of the ways my experience has been shaped, is in weighting the waters between those with the extreme acknowledgement of the inequity that exists, and those who sort of hide their head sort of under a rock and say, no, there's no such thing. And I've looked at it as, I've always looked at the world as my sort of playground and learning field and opportunity to educate others. And so I felt a sense of responsibility to then say, because I'm sort of an African in the diaspora, if you will, I do have a responsibility to help anyone who doesn't. Naturally, as human beings, we are afraid of what we don't understand, and so anyone who does not understand Either how an African makes it over here for college and then ultimately into the workforce, or needs to understand culture and how our cultures are different, and that how what makes us tick is different. I've sought to be that educator in whatever way I can be. Another thing is this: with our unconscious biases and preconceived notions, in some cases about certain groups of people, we tend to put people in boxes. When I say we, I do the same thing, right? So because in my unique experience of coming as an international student and sort of getting right into the mix of things at Michigan State University, I started as an RA, started teaching right away and different things. There are a lot of boxes. I did not fit the box, and so I had this love, I still do, for country music, which is a story for another day. And so here's this girl from Nigeria, 16-year-old from Nigeria, who does not fit the mold. So what do we do with her? Where do we place her? So that I took that as an opportunity to then educate and to say, here's who I truly am at the core. And here is how my culture has shaped me. Here is how the same culture may have shaped others who you may have seen with diverse personalities and that sort of thing. Lastly, I'll share a quote that a friend shared with me recently. When we change the way we look at things, we change the things we look at, and I think that that applies to this conversation in many ways, in that if a person's skin color or other attributes of that person, which, by the way, the person cannot change, right? So when we talk about race and gender, these are attributes of myself that are God-given, natural. So when we see that and focus on that and sort of layer on our preconceived notions, that's sort of failure from the onset of the relationship. It's sort of, you're not able to build a relationship with that person with an open mind. But I think my encouragement to myself, to all of us, is to continue to change what it is we're looking at, look at those deeper benefits of diversity, the diversity of thought, look at some research as to the benefits of diversity to organizations, and I think that would do us that's a good starting point. So.
Well, thank you so much. A lot of just wonderful information, and indeed a unique experience. And those of us from other Big Ten schools won't hold Michigan State against you. I mean, you're allowed to make a mistake when you come to the country. It's a country you didn't know about. I understand that. I know we're running out of time here. We only have 3 or 4 minutes left, and it's just so many things for us to talk about. One question came in about expanding. How can one expand a network? And Tom, I wanted you to touch bases a little bit. I mentioned before about walking the talk. I know you have started an initiative that not only expanded your network. I got a note. We have until 11:45, so I got some more time. I'm good. But so let's go on this into this note about expanding your network. And Tom, maybe talk a little bit about that initiative that you helped to start and how that has expanded your network, your perspective, et cetera. And then I'll come to everybody else with this question. What can somebody listens to this and says, I realize that I'm probably living in a little bit of a bubble and I need to do something differently. What do I do?
Well, I recognized many years ago, maybe too late in the career to make the big difference, but that in struggling to become a more diverse firm, to hire and attract women, African Americans, Hispanics to the firm, that it was very difficult, and that really where we needed to start, it was too much of a competition for talent of experienced people. You started with graduates, college graduates, and then we realized we had to go back and hire summer interns, and we went to historically black colleges and universities and created a summer university and all those things, and then finally hiring those individuals and attracting them as full-time employees, we did have a high rate of success, and then also try to grow our own, from the local community, taking high school students, trying to interest them in engineering, architecture, planning, and so forth. But anyway, as a result of that, started to take a look at myself and the culture of the firm, which, was a very pleasant place to work. I don't think I've ever heard very few people argue, and, very nice environment. But, what did it really say to people that didn't look like, the white men and women that were the majority of the firm? And recognizing that leaders need to model the way, I started to look at my own bias and prejudice, and looked for resources to learn more about myself. And that's when, I explained earlier to you that, I formed a group with another person, to try to study and understand prejudice and bias and the history of racism, and understand the Black experience, the white experience with all that, and actually lead to some type of change, personal change, organizational change, community change, and reached out to other heads of engineering architecture firms, and as well as other businesses, in the Rochester area, which is where we're headquartered, and, have built, a group right now that has 11 different cohorts, with 10 people, about 110 involved in it in different phases, but with the idea that we start, with leadership and make change, personally, as leaders, and then hopefully extend that to the culture of the company and contributions to the community, both time, talent, and treasure. And so, the George Floyd murder, helped it initiate and get, people interested in it, but it seems to be sustaining itself. But again, it's trying to have an outreach, a no-cost program to all leaders that have an interest to take a look at themselves and their organizations. And it's been quite gratifying. And it's a lot of work, but it's a good way to put my time and enlist the time of others.
That's wonderful. What's your biggest surprise? The thing that is, maybe shocked you or that surprised you most with this whole initiative?
Well, like me, most say, certainly maybe it's white men and women that, I didn't know, I never understood this, and when you realize it was right in front of you, and then, the most growth, certainly personally, and I've had it from others, is, not talking to white people, but going and really having a serious conversation, develop, relationship with someone different. And could be an African-American man, woman, Hispanic, or whatever it is, but understand their experience. And I've just found, the drive for change in me has come from them telling me what they've been experiencing all the time I've known them, but they've never told me, they've never shared until I asked. And then it, becomes one of those humbling things. Wow, you must have think I was a real heel or not a friend, because, you didn't share with me, the hurt, and anxiety, the what you've seen in terms of discrimination and so, again, that maybe is the biggest thing. If you don't ask, if you don't develop that relationship, you're going to remain blind. And so. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Alexandra, this actually goes right into a question I wanted to ask you, because you got, youth on your side, but you're also, typically one of the only female, professional engineers around. So Tom just talked about being surprised about people's experiences. Is there anything that you would want people to know about what that experience is like for you? And then touch as well on this question about the network, how people might build a network.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. It sounds a little cliche, but as a young female engineer, I love being introduced as an engineer. In part because I'm proud of my accomplishments, my degrees in engineering, my professional engineering license. Those all took a lot of hard work. But I also need to be introduced as an engineer, frankly, because of the biases out there, to see, a young woman, if I'm the one who sends a meeting invite, it's probably just because I offered and I'm always willing to help, or maybe I'm leading the meeting in the first place. But I've had experiences where, technical managers that don't know me, will say, "Oh, I saw you. I didn't realize you were a PE." It's like, well, who did you think I was? But, on the flip side, actually just last week, I started on a new project and I visited the construction site, and the program director introduced me to everybody as, this is Alex. She's new to the team. She's an engineer. And I loved it because there was absolutely no time for biases to set forth in someone's brain. You know, right off the bat, I'm an engineer, period. Let's move on. And I'm proud and I'm appreciative to work for a company, you know, shout out WSP, who employs senior leaders who do that. So thank you. But to the question about, you know, networking, how do you expand your network? I tell every emerging leader who I speak to about this, if there's somebody you want to meet, ask. Oh, Jarek, I understand. I saw in an email, you know Cletus. I am dying to meet Cletus and ask him about X, Y, and Z. Would you mind introducing me? And then, by the way, Jarek, when you do introduce me, please introduce me as an engineer. Kind of tying back to my previous point, it's, you know, if you want to meet somebody, just ask. And then those who are making the introduction, do it appropriately and professionally.
I appreciate that. And now you all notice now in my introduction, I made sure to get in that Alex is an engineer, right? So I can, you know, it's a very real thing because because people make assumptions, and it's, you know, it's really interesting because, you know, I've been in that situation, you know, many times. I've talked about the fact in the presentation that depending on what I'm wearing, people will make different assumptions about who I am. You don't necessarily get the benefit of the doubt when you're in an underrepresented group. So thank you for sharing that. This is critically important. You know, Ricardo, you have responsibility for this stuff on a day-to-day, you know, on a day-to-day basis because this is kind of what your focus is for your organization. And you've already shared some really interesting ideas and, you know, about the stuff that happens under the surface, the stuff that we can't see, but it all contributes to what we ultimately see. What do you think now this is a hard question, man, with just a little time. We don't have a whole lot of time. So, you know, maybe one of the most significant challenges you see that's keeping us from moving to the next step. And then also comment on this question about my network. How do I expand my network?
Yeah, thank you, Jarek. That's a great question. So I think the main challenge from my perspective is that change takes time, and you have to be strategic and you have to be intentional. And I think, you know, many of us, I know that we at Stantec did last year, we reacted, right? And we wanted to do things quickly, and our staff was rightly so putting pressure on us to do more, right? Because we're so connected to the community, and we had to be intentional on the things that we could do quickly. We did, you know, on the things that we knew it would take time. We actually took our time to do it. And the example that I'll give was our partnerships with HBCUs. You know, I think many organizations, you know, talked about it. Many organizations, you know, made commitments. They announced, you know, funds that they were going to. And we decided to do a more strategic approach, you know, where we said, you know, we're not going to just react. We are going to take a little bit of time to understand, you know, how do we build a meaningful, long-lasting partnership, right? So we did an analysis on the top HBCUs that we wanted to partner, you know, the ones that offer the programs that were in line with our business, right? The ones that had engineering programs, architecture programs, scientists, design programs, you know, where they were located, what was the dynamics of our offices, and most importantly, you know, the alumni that we had from those organizations, and how can we really tap into them to really build this meaningful connection. And we're not done. We're in the middle of it. We're taking our time, and I know a lot of our colleagues are probably frustrated because they want to see more action. So I think that is, you know, just to be brief, that it really takes time. There are tons of opportunities though that I see. You know, there is a lot of leadership support. You know, our leaders are talking about this, not because we're telling them, which was, you know, I've been in this space for so many years. And before, you know, you need to tell your leaders, hey, don't forget to mention diversity and inclusion. It's like, oh yeah, now we don't have to do that, you know, all the way from our CEO our CEO Stu Lerner, who is involved with ACEC, and many other leaders are really talking about it in a meaningful and personal way, and really take responsibility to create change. So that is briefly what I would like to share with you in the audience.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Cletus, I want to go back to you. We talked again, about the set-aside programs and thinking about the big picture and all of that. What other kind of things can people be doing to help to boost the number of women, minority-owned businesses, or are there other ideas and things that folks should be doing? And then also touch on this question of expanding one's network.
Okay, increasing the number of women and minority-owned firms is a tough one because the engineering field today is challenging enough to get entrance into classical engineering fields today, talk less attracting entrepreneurs into engineering. But all the same, increasing the support for STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math subjects, and encouraging entry into engineering will help. Things like scholarship programs there, the SCEC does, ABCD, and other organizations do. But you'd be surprised to see how many of those scholarships are unclaimed because it's just not people going into the field. So encouraging that is will help. Incorporating basic business and entrepreneurial education in engineering curricula in the colleges, that will help, maybe as electives. Mm-hmm. And that will have people thinking, particularly when they know that there are opportunities for minorities and women out there. Mm-hmm. Mentor protege programs that some state agencies do. New York State does have a mentor protege program where established firms like TAMS take on emerging firms or fledgling firms and mentor them. So if minorities and women know that programs like that exist at the state level, that will encourage them. Port Authority is working on one also, and some other agencies are. Then access to capital, that's an important one because as Jarek's presentation showed us, there are inherent biases that are baked in every one of us. And all those come to play in the financial institutions for business lending. And that is things that the private sector and the public sector can do to open, to give access to small minority and women access to capital. That will help. And then finally, the quality of projects that we get as minority and women-owned firms. We do visible projects. I can give you examples of very prominent projects that we can do, and we've competed elegantly on, but bigger firms got it. Now, those are the projects that will employees that we see, or that we get good employees with good projects, and then good employees become good entrepreneurs as they grow in the company. So that will help the visibility of the projects that we do. And that's it.
Yeah, so all these are great ideas. I think what I take away from this is that it's a comprehensive approach, right? There needs to be different angles. When you put it all together, that combined story becomes much richer, and you see opportunities, and not just have people opportunities, but when they have those opportunities, they be very, very prepared. So that they are not set up for failure, but set up for success. So I know we have just a couple minutes left for real this time. But Adama, if you can touch a little bit on that. Look, you've talked about the fact that the world is your playground, and you've had some interesting experiences. Then somebody's asked about this whole networking and, how do I expand? Can you touch on that a little bit? Because you have a different approach than some when it comes to that.
Absolutely, Jarek. The first thing I think is regarding networking is to defeat the urge to, when it comes to the D&I conversation, defeat the urge to talk sort of too broad and keep the keep the vision for change at this global level. We all want to change the world, but our world start with, the core, could be family, neighbors, and then it's sort of the sphere of influence grows out from there. So I think with regard to beefing up or growing one's network, it starts with your immediate surroundings, and keeping the conversation at that 50,000 foot view allows for passion to be communicated, but does not allow for tangible action to be taken. Yeah. So, and I always like to say untamed passion can be very dangerous, right? Because it's sort of it stays as an idea forever. So I think with regard to building one's network, it's as simple as, asking for introductions. It's as easy as getting connected and staying connected to organizations like ACEC, and attending or sessions like these. Now, we have had to get used to the new normal of virtual discussions. All the same, the technology has allowed us and is providing for us the opportunities to connect in different ways. So I think that we first, again, I go back to my earlier point about changing what we look at. I also think that starting to eat the elephant one bite at a time is important. Setting goals, we set goals in business. We start the year with a strategic plan in some cases. I think that the diversity and inclusion conversation and the growth of one's network should not be left out of our goal setting and saying, what, by the end of this year, here's how many more connections I want to have and what impact I want to make on my community. So those are just a few ideas and areas that we can start to make change, one step at a time.
Well, terrific. Again, I wish we had a lot of time to delve into to more of these, and hopefully this discussion is going to spur other discussions with people after they get off the webcast. They'll talk to the folks in their home office if they're still in their home office. I think some themes that are jumping out for me is, number one, you got to want to change, right? You have to have the heart for this in a sense. You have to have the desire to create an environment that everybody can flourish. So it has to start with that. But after that, you got to put those engineering skills to work, right? These are problems and challenges, and they require, a set of skills to analyze and to think about what the appropriate interventions are going to be, just like much of what you all do in your day-to-day work. The other thing I hear is that there's not one path for everybody. Even if we look the same, we might have a different background, perspective, a different path that we might want to take. But the good news from an optimistic standpoint is that there are more people now who might not have been paying as much attention as we would have hoped, are starting to pay attention. And so some of these conversations are starting to resonate with people in ways that may not have happened before. Certainly 100 years ago, as it relates to this organization. So congratulations again on the 100-year anniversary of this fine organization. I want to thank the panelists. It's been a pleasure having the discussions with you, and I know we will stay connected after this discussion. Thank you for the sponsors for generating an opportunity for us to have this discussion, and I absolutely appreciate you all inviting me. I know we're going to close now. I think Jay Simpson, whom you all know, is the president and CEO of ACEC New York. Jay is going to close the program. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you, Dr. Conrad, and thank you to all the panelists. This is not always an easy conversation, and we will continue them in a professional and always respectable and civil manner. We will all grow and learn, and they will become more normal and more comfortable. We will also continue these conversations and programs, including one scheduled for about 6 weeks from now. ACEC National is also holding various forums. Special thanks to Diana Kaufman and Kathy Metcalf for spearheading the HR Forum and what developed here today. And also thanks to Ray Dadazio, our chair, for making sure that we are addressing this head on. Both ACEC New York and me personally will be making contributions to the Alzheimer's Association, and hopefully this will encourage others on this program to do the same. The conference will continue with our cybersecurity and other programs today, and our membership board and congressional, as well as other tracks today and tomorrow. Again, thank you all for participating. Have a great rest of the day, and look forward to seeing you all both virtually and hopefully live before too long.